So I feel this is a movie you should watch when you're either high or stoned, but not when you've been at a meeting all day on a Monday and you come home and that's your evening entertainment. We are talking about Lucifer's Satanic Daughter, directed and written by Chana Thistle. Now this is one of these films that is somewhat surreal, you might say, and it's also a film that incorporates a real-life true crime element, but with a more fantastical premise, kind of. So this is a story that involves a killer known as the Acid King, a guy called Ricky Casso, who in the height of the Satanic Panic in the 80s actually murdered his friend whilst on drugs, and there were occult elements about it. We actually reviewed a documentary, well Lisa reviewed a documentary some time ago called The Acid King, and Chana Thistle, who's actually the director of this movie, was involved in that documentary. But this is a dramatic narrative movie that incorporates that murder, but with a whole bunch of other craziness, and I do mean craziness. So what's the story, if we can kind of call it that? Okay, so it focuses on a group of outsiders, a group of friends who are into the kind of the heavy metal scene in this time period in the 80s. The Satanic Panic is going on, everyone's kind of very up in arms about this kind of situation, and the kind of the teens, the youngsters, they're out partying, they're taking drugs, listening to heavy metal, getting drunk, going to these kind of parties and effectively causing havoc there. We focus on this group of friends who travel to this party. So about halfway through the movie we get the murder that actually did take place, and this actually unleashes this kind of witch along with a bunch of kind of Templar Knight kind of zombie types that go around killing the rest of these kind of teenagers as they are doing drugs. Or is it actually Ricky that is doing the rest of this killing? Or is it actually just a bad acid trip? Well, you have to watch the movie and find out, and you may not even then be any the wiser. So, let's discuss. So this is a film, one of these kind of retro films in a way, that sort of is taking place in the kind of the 80s and tries to kind of recreate that sort of period, both with the obviously the subject matter, but with the kind of the style of filming. There's kind of the scratches, they're kind of not quite as good, you know, visuals, things like that. So it's kind of one of these films which is trying to have a bit of a vintage sort of look to it. Now, I would say this: if you have ever taken acid or that type of drugs, this is probably a good sort of depiction of what that experience is probably going to be like, at least on film, because this movie is just nearly all a huge kind of acid trip with kind of weird camera angles, fisheye lenses, filters, video effects, kind of a droning kind of music score to give you this kind of hypnotic, surreal visual trip. So the movie, I think, obviously is exploring this lifestyle of sort of mayhem, chaos and drugs, along with kind of heavy metal and sex and everything. And I think the movie does succeed in maybe giving you the idea here that this is the kind of the mental state that these young people are kind of going through. So good job on that. It's a lot of the film. In fact, it's nearly all of the film. Not quite all, but nearly all. So bear that in mind. Now, the fact that this is a movie that does incorporate a true life crime aspect, obviously I wouldn't quite say this is a realistic depiction of the events that have happened, but you have that in the backdrop, and that is the sort of the sobering reality of this movie, I guess. But I think what it's trying to suggest is how out of control maybe the real life Ricky Casso maybe was. But it has a lot of crazy visuals on the screen. So we have this kind of, this witch, and she is like, at least according to this movie, a resurrection of like a Templar Knight style sort of entity, and she's got all these kind of like Blind Dead sort of style followers that are hanging around, and there is some pretty graphic stuff on the screen. There's a lot of kind of practical kills, but there's also a lot of gross stuff on screen that aren't necessarily to do with kind of like kills, but we have someone throwing up and then kind of eating his own vomit. We've got a guy being forced to eat a used tampon. So bear in mind, this movie has some sort of shenanigans going on, shall we say, that might not be for everyone's taste. But it's certainly memorable, I would suggest. Now, the visuals are not going to be for everyone, but I do think, as I say, it does sort of, I think capture that crazed, drugged out kind of brain. And I would maybe, I don't take drugs, but if you are the sort of person that indulges and you would have watched this, God only knows what would happen. You'd be like doubling down, is all I would say. But there are some kind of quite interesting things done visually with these kind of creatures, and as I say, the movie sort of straddles like, is this real? Is this some drugged out fever dream, or is it the kind of, at least in this movie, you know, the Ricky Casso going and killing more people and things. The movie also has like a Clerks like vibe to it as well, the Kevin Smith movie, really before all the craziness and where we're more introduced to these sort of characters. We have these group of teens just hanging out and kind of talking and listening to music, and then starting to do the drugs before it really sort of kicks in, and it kind of gives you that sort of Clerks vibe. A lot of the dialogue, to me at least, sounds like it's sort of improvised, and there are sequences here where I do feel the you know, the acting does seem sort of quite naturalistic at times. Not all of the time, and I'll come on to that, but there are sequences where I do feel it's probably kind of you know, improvised. It does give you this kind of naturalistic sort of feel to it. So it's like a crazy, gory, violent, drugged up even further version of Clerks meets The Blind Dead, you know, meets true crime. There you go. So what doesn't work? So let's just jump on again to the acting. I think this movie is a mix between the more scripted dialogue and the more improvised scenes. At least that's the impression I get. The improvised scenes seem realistic and kind of like these are just incidental conversations, but some of the other sort of acting is a little bit on the cheesy and wooden side. Now this might be a directorial choice because obviously the whole, or nearly the whole story is, you know, meant to be this drugged out hyper reality, but I don't know. I mean, it sometimes the dialogue seemed a little bit wooden, is all I'm kind of saying, or a little bit silly. And there's a scene with like a priest where I feel it's meant to be, but for the rest of it, and again, some of the ADR seems a little bit sort of overdone at times. So, you know, but a relatively minor point. The real thing here is this movie is like chaos on screen. It's just loads of like psychedelic, surreal images vomited up on screen, and then you get a few kind of kills or weird stuff or nudity or satanic images, lots of flashing lights. If you want a narrative, you know, a more coherent story, if you want a movie which details the real life true crime case, or even just an intricate story that isn't this movie. This is just more of an experience, I would say, rather than a kind of you know, an actual story that needs to be told. And like I said, there are elements here where I feel it won't be to people's taste. You know, it's quite, it goes to quite extremes in some ways. But then there are some kind of like well done practical effects, but you know, it's more of the other stuff, like the kind of the weirder, grosser stuff maybe that I feel would be a touch much for some. When it all comes down to it, I mean, the movie is a lot of style over substance. If you like this kind of style, then it's a lot to have on, you know, it's a lot you can put on and kind of just do what you want to do and have this crazy movie playing on in the background, which is probably the best way to enjoy it. But as I said, when you've been in a meeting all day and you come back home from work and it's a Monday, maybe this isn't the best movie to kind of watch in that respect. But with a kind of a more measured approach, I would say this movie's about a 5 out of 10 for me, because it's certainly interesting. It's certainly a kind of a unique watch. But was I engaged? Not really, if I'm honest. It's just a little bit too much surreal vomit for me, to be honest. And yeah, not really exactly a captivating story with well-developed characters. There's none of that here. So a 5 out of 10, an interesting movie. Certainly it will be polarising, one would suggest. Certainly not for everyone. Have you seen it? Would you see it? Please let me know what your thoughts are, and I look forward to seeing you next time.